This is a podcast sponsored by To Enlighten Research. I'm Sara Siqueira. Today, Amanda and I will talk a bit about choosing between randomized control trial and observational studies. Welcome, Amanda.
My pleasure, Sara.
Well, Amanda, the selection between randomized control trials and observational studies sometimes can be a duel of titans. One can defend randomized control trials and other observational studies. However, this discussion must rely on the research question.
Indeed, Sara. Each one has a different duty in providing scientific knowledge, so that we need to understand what we want to answer when choosing one method over the other.
Exactly, Amanda. Both types of studies have strengths and weaknesses that must be taken into account when choosing for their use and when interpreting their results. Moreover, when assessing the literature, it is also important to be aware of the quality of the study and the reported data. Hence, when they are well designed and conducted, both can contribute to scientific knowledge development and to bring light to clinical decision making and public health.
Great, Sara. Yeah. Randomized control trials are still the gold standard designed to test the efficacy and safety of a new intervention in comparison with a standard therapy. When high methodological quality is applied, the fact that the researchers can control the intervention and the presence of the randomization process are the key for the robustness of the findings of the causal relationship between treatments and outcomes. On the other hand, performing randomized control trials may not always be possible or ethical or feasible. In this vein, observational studies are a good strategy.
Yeah, Amanda. Observational studies are used to perform the main epidemiological research. It can observe risk factors and prognostic factors. It can be applied especially as an alternative when randomized control trials are unethical, unfeasible, and expensive to be carried out. Besides, from observational studies, new hypotheses can arise to be tested throughout the randomized control trial, and observational studies can be a proper approach to complement, to provide external validity to previous trials, and expand findings from randomized control trials considering certain intervention aspects. Also, it can determine whether post-market drugs are of true effectiveness and safety in a long-term follow-up. It can represent a proximity to real-life situations. Therefore, when well designed and conducted, observational studies can bring relevant information.
It is worth mentioning, Sara, that over the past decades, evidence from randomized control trials only supported fewer than 50% of European and American cardiology guideline recommendations, and it has been more discussed the value of observational real-world evidence studies.
In fact, Amanda, it is stated that observational studies can bring evidence related to the real world, in contrast to the external validity concerns linked to the randomized control trials. Therefore, there is an increasing claim to use observational study to calculate the effects of treatment.
Exactly, Sara. Elements associated with different findings from both models are intrinsically linked to the external validity, where the control environment and strict eligibility criteria of randomized control trials are far different from the broader population included in observational studies. In addition, a correct assumption on the selection of the proper outcome and an adequate sample size estimate are critical in randomized control trials to achieve enough statistical power so that, in the context of bureaucracy and expensive cost of randomized control trials, if these aspects are not precise, they may lead to misleading conclusions. Likewise, the follow-up criteria are related to different findings in both types of study as well.
Good points, Amanda. Observational studies are carried out using real-world data. The main problem is related to not comparable groups due to the lack of randomization, the potential risk of bias such as selection and information bias, as well as measured and unmeasured confounders that can lead to questionable results. So, when adjustment for confounding is not applied, the validity of the findings of observational studies decreases. However, even accounting on potential bias and confounders, residual confounding may remain. Moreover, there are risks of missing data, such as issues of collection data from electronic device that can affect the validity of the result. Besides, observational studies are often related to per protocol effects, while randomized control trials to intention to treat effects. And observational studies need to be well reported following proper guidelines. Consequently, findings from observational studies and randomized control trials can be different.
Wonderful, Sarah. Let's take a look at the controversy of vitamin E in preventing cardiovascular events. Recently in this year, the U.S. Preventive Service Task Force stated against the use of beta-carotene or vitamin E supplements to prevent cardiovascular disease or cancer. It was an update of 2014 previous statement that also recommend against their usage.
Great, Amanda. The whole of the proposed use of vitamin E to prevent cardiovascular disease was related to its potent lipid-soluble antioxidant carried in LDL effect. So, in vitro, it was shown that it can inhibit smooth muscle cells proliferation, and when in the plasma, it can enhance LDL oxidation resistance. LDL oxidation is highly related to atherosclerosis, and individuals' LDL oxidation susceptibility is related to atherosclerosis severity.
Perfect, Sarah. Based on that, researchers hypothesized observational and randomized control trials to better evaluate vitamin E benefits. A remarkable observational study was the Nurse Health Study NHS, a prospective cohort. It evaluated the diet intake, including vitamin E intake and other multivitamin supplements by questionnaires in 98,462 women with 34 to 59 years old and without cardiovascular disease or history of cancer. The first questionnaire was applied in 1980 and the follow-up questionnaires were applied in 1982, 1984, 1986, and 1988. The primary endpoint was major coronary disease, non-fatal myocardial infarction, or death related to coronary disease. However, other cardiovascular or cerebrovascular events were assessed as well. Then it was evaluated if vitamin E acted as a primary prevention therapy against coronary artery disease. As a result, during the follow-up to 8 years, the use of vitamin E supplements was linked to a reduced risk of coronary heart disease, although from this data, cause and effect relation could not be proven. The prospective cohort included health participants. The design had eliminated the recall bias, and the study had a great follow-up rate. The authors considered reliable the information provided by the participants regarding the vitamin E usage and the potential risk factors during the study. The adjustment for risk factors resulted in minor confounding. The risk of unmeasured confounder existed but needed to be highly associated with the intervention and risk factors to explain the findings. The cohort was well conducted, but here it is important to mention the healthy user bias concept.
Brilliant, Amanda. Now let me talk about the HOPE trial. This 2x2 factorial study evaluated the effect of the use of vitamin E from natural source and ramipril on cardiovascular events in patients with high cardiovascular risk and without left ventricular dysfunction. So, this study enrolled 2,545 women and 6,996 men with at least 55 years old during 4 to 6 years, an average of 4 years and a half. It evaluated a composite endpoint as a primary outcome defined as myocardial infarction, stroke, and death from cardiovascular causes. In addition, the secondary outcomes were unstable angina, congestive heart failure, revascularization or amputation, death from any cause, complication of diabetes and cancer. Therefore, it evaluated the effect of vitamin E in cardiovascular outcomes. As a result, the use of 400 units of vitamin E during 4 to 6 years did not demonstrate benefit on cardiovascular outcomes. This trial was also well conducted with a higher rate of compliance and confirmed the results from other previous trials.
Wonderful, Sada. The role of vitamin E in cardiovascular disease or events has been studied for many years, with several controversial findings in many studies, which resulted in the task force for better evaluate the effect of vitamin E.
In fact, Amanda, regarding the nurse cohort study and the HOPE trial, it is important to address that the different findings were not only attributed to the different study designs, but it's important to highlight that the studies evaluated different study population regarding age, gender, cardiovascular risk, and vitamin E was assessed as different therapeutic strategies. Therefore, it is not possible to compare both studies straightforwardly.
Very good, Sada. Overall, the difference in treatment effect between randomized control trial and observational studies is often related to different research questions. The different designs, different risk of concealment bias, the calculated effect. Also, it is important to consider the effect modification phenomenon, the difference in distribution of effect modifying variables that are applied to measured variables. Besides, the Hawthorne effect is more related to randomized control trial. Moreover, some authors stated the use of observational data to emulate a target trial in order to avoid self-inflicted bias common to observational studies. However, it is not simple to do target trial emulation. Therefore, applicability of the results of randomized control trials and vice versa and randomized control trials are not a litmus test for the validity of observational studies. In this sense, some authors stated that meta-analysis, including randomized control trial and observational studies, can be a good strategy to evaluate questions not solved by randomized control trial and observational studies.
Exactly, Amanda. The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recommendation statement this year reviewed the evidence on the efficacy of vitamin E supplementation in adults, men and non-pregnant women with 18 years or older without non-cardiovascular disease or chronic disease or nutritional deficiencies. It was evaluated 9 randomized controlled trials related to vitamin E and 8 randomized controlled trials associated to multivitamin supplementation. The findings suggested against the use of beta-carotene or vitamin E supplements to prevent cardiovascular disease or cancer, a grade D recommendation. Nevertheless, there is still a gap if long study duration can detect an effect on cardiovascular outcomes, as well as a lack of information if heterogeneity among specific population or related to baseline nutrient level or socioeconomic factors can impact the results.
Amazing, Sarah. Well, this is the final episode of the case discussion. We are truly thankful to everyone who listened to us and who were part with us from this incredible journey during the PPCR class of 2022. From the bottom of our heart, we wish you all the best.